Everyone, I want to show you this.
Get a little closer to the camera. There you go. You want to tell everyone how it happened?
It was overnight because I was under my table and I knocked my head on the bench
Did we?
trying to get it out.
Yeah. Did we learn a lesson?
Yeah,
Mm-hmm. What's that lesson?
not to ever play around it.
Not something that small, right? There's bigger
Right.
tables to play under than that teeny tiny one you were playing in.
Yeah.
So, you want to tell me anything about Noah, or just?
He's doing pretty good.
Mm-hmm. Is he sleeping?
No, just for a little bit because he'll do it for Daddy.
He'll sleep a little bit for me. That's right. Will he sleep for mommy in a bed?
No,
Not at
because I
all.
feel like he needs to eat if Mommy's around.
That's right. Mommy's a buffet to him, right? Yeah. You want to say anything else?
No, bye.
Bye. All right, can you close that door when you go through?
Yeah.
Thank you, darling. Welcome back. As you can see, she decided to lose two teeth, which, if you guys know me, that is like teeth are my nightmare. Like, I don't think I have an official phobia, but I really hate teeth. I hated them when I was a kid. I hated losing when I was a kid. I hate looking at loose teeth as it is now. And so, like, her being at the age where she is losing teeth is just absolutely um, it's terrifying for me. So I will say this: in addition to being an amazing mom to Noah and raising him, she's also Danielle is an amazing mom to Ava this week, and in fact, actually pulled those two teeth because they were ready to go. So I really appreciate her actually doing that. Like I said, I can't do teeth. Today we're going to do all of chapter 25. I actually really I don't want to say that I had fun with this one because it is a serious subject, but there was part of something about this chapter made me kind of laugh and shake my head because I feel like I could actually like so see this happening. I can almost visualize this even in like modern day. And so we're really going to spend, we're going to talk about the two main characters, who one is going to be Nabal and then the other one David. And we're going to be talking about their rashness because they were really, really rash to each other in this case. And so we're gonna read the whole chapter and then kind of talk through it. So, starting at the beginning of chapter 25. Now Samuel died, and all Israel assembled and mourned for him, and they buried him at his home in Ramah. Then David moved down into the desert of Paran. A certain man named Maon, who had property there at Carmel, was very wealthy. He had 1,000 goats and 3,000 sheep, and he was shearing in Carmel. His name was Nabal, and his wife's name was Abigail. She was an intelligent and beautiful woman, but her husband was surly and mean in his dealings. He was a Calebite. While David was in the wilderness, he heard that Nabal was shearing sheep. So he sent 10 young men and said to them, "Go up to Nabal in Carmel and greet him in my name. Say to him, 'Long life to you, good health to you and your household, and good health to all that is yours.' Now I hear that it is sheep shearing time. When your shepherds were with us, we did not mistreat them, and the whole time they were at Carmel nothing of theirs was missing. Ask your own servants, and they will tell you. Therefore be favorable towards my men, since we come at a festive time. Please give your servants and your son David whatever you can find for them." When David's men arrived, they gave Nabal this message in David's name. Then they waited. Nabal answered David's servants, "Who is this David? Who is this son of Jesse? Many servants are breaking away from their masters these days. Why should I take bread and water, and the meat that I have slaughtered from my shears, and give it to the men coming from who knows where?" David's men turned around and went back, and when they arrived, they reported every word. David said to his men, "Each of you strap on your sword." So they did, and David strapped on his as well. About 400 men went up with David, while 200 stayed with the supplies. One of the servants told Abigail, Nabal's wife, "David sent messengers from the wilderness to give our master his greetings, but he hurled insults at them. Yet these men were very good to us. They did not mistreat us, and the whole time we were out in the fields near them nothing was missing. Night and day they were a wall around us the whole time we were herding our sheep near them. Now think it over and see what you can do, because disaster is hanging over our master and his whole household. He is such a wicked man that no one can talk to him." Abigail acted quickly. She took 200 loaves of bread, 2 skins of wine, 5 dressed sheep, 5 seahs of roasted grain, and 100 cakes of raisins, and 200 cakes of pressed figs, and loaded them on donkeys. Then she told her servants, "Go on ahead, I'll follow you." But she did not tell her husband Nabal. As she came riding her donkey into a mountain ravine, there were David and his men descending toward her, and she met them. David had just said, "It's been useless, all my watching over this fellow's property in the wilderness so that nothing of his was missing. He had paid me back evil for good. May God deal with David, be it ever so severely, if by morning I leave alive one male of all who belongs to him." When Abigail saw David, she quickly got off her donkey and bowed down before David with her face to the ground. She fell at his feet and said, "Pardon your servant, my lord, and let me speak to you. Hear what your servant has to say. Please pay no attention, my lord, to that wicked man Nabal. He is just like his name. His name means fool, and folly goes with him. And as for me, your servant, I did not see the men my lord sent. And now, my lord, as surely as the Lord your God lives, and you live, since the Lord has kept you from bloodshed and from avenging yourself with your own hands, may your enemies and all who are intent on harming my lord be like Nabal. And let this gift which your servant has brought to my lord be given to the men who follow you. Please forgive your servant's presumption. The Lord your God will certainly make a lasting dynasty for my lord, because you fight the Lord's battle, and no wrongdoing will be found in you as long as you live. Even though someone is pursuing you to take your life, the life of my lord will be bound securely in the bundle of the living by the Lord your God. But the lives of your enemies he will hurl away as from a pocket of a sling. When the Lord has fulfilled my lord every good thing he promised concerning him, and has appointed him ruler over Israel, my lord will not have on his conscience the staggering burden of needless bloodshed, or of having avenged himself. And when the Lord your God has brought my lord success, remember your servant." David said to Abigail, "Praise be to the Lord, the God of Israel, who has sent you to me today. May you be blessed for your good judgment, and for keeping me from bloodshed this day, and from avenging myself with my own hands. Otherwise, as surely as the Lord, the God of Israel, lives, who has kept me from harming you, if you had not come quickly to meet me, not one male belonging to Nabal would have been left alive by daybreak." Then David accepted from her what she had brought him, and said, "Go home in peace. I have heard your words and granted your request." When Abigail went to Nabal, he was in the house holding a banquet like that of a king. He was in high spirits and very drunk, so she told him nothing at all until daybreak. Then in the morning, when Nabal was sober, his wife told him these things, and his heart failed him because he became like a stone. About 10 days later, the Lord struck Nabal, and he died. When David heard that Nabal was dead, he said, "Praise be to the Lord, who has upheld my cause against Nabal for treating me with contempt. He has kept his servant from doing wrong, and has brought Nabal's wrongdoing down on his own head." Then David sent word to Abigail, asking her to become his wife. His servants went to Carmel and said to Abigail, "David has sent us to you to take you to become his wife." She bowed down with her face to the ground and said, "I am your servant, and am ready to serve you and wash the feet of my Lord's servants." Abigail quickly got on a donkey, and attended by her 5 female servants, went with David's messengers and became his wife. David had also married Ahinoam of Jezreel, and they were both his wives. But Saul had given his daughter Michal, David's wife, to Paltiel, son of Laish, who was from Gallim. And so, like I said, I found this really kind of a really interesting, and in some ways, I hate to say entertaining, but entertaining chapter, because it feels like something that I could absolutely see happening today in some ways. So let's look back up and get a little bit of background history of what actually kind of happened in this chapter. Back in this day, actually, a pretty old custom was in this time, according to the devotional I read, was that there would be certain groups of people, kind of armed men, who would actually ride around and protect the property of others and protect the livestock and stuff. And so you remember David's a shepherd, and what we see here is he's not acting as a shepherd, but he's also kind of acting as protection with his army, with his armed men. Again, it was about 400 to 600 men. And in the wilderness where he is hiding, he is protecting this property of Nabal. A couple things that we do know is it appears, based off some of the context clues we get here, that at this point, once again, David is fleeing from Saul, even though it seems like Saul and David had reconciled in the previous chapter. It appears that now he's on the run again. He's in the wilderness, and this man had his livestock in the wilderness, and David during this time protected it. Now, the custom is at this time that if you have a group of men like David's people who are protecting you, it's not law, but it is custom to provide them some of the livestock as effectively a payment or a food rent for their services of protecting your area and for not harming your people or anything else like that. Now, in some ways, this sounds very, very mafia-like in the sense that if you've seen some of the old stories of the mafia, they'd have a neighborhood and all the different stores and households in that area have to pay a little bit to the mafia to make sure that to be protected in that area. Of course, if you didn't pay it, they kind of came back on you. So it almost sounds a little bit like kind of the old school mafia, and maybe that's some of the root of what the mafia was at the time. But this was actually considered legal custom that he had armed men. That was their skill was protecting this livestock, and that's what they did. And then when it's time to actually harvest, they get some of the livestock and some of the goods for their own need. Um, and so we hear the person that the livestock on the property that we see that David is protecting as Nabal. And we know that it says he's very wealthy, and they even give us detail of how much livestock he had. And so he had it in the wilderness, which conveniently appears to be the same area where David was because he was fleeing. It also, just to be clear, it appears that this time within the book, it seems very apparent that the whole nation now knows that David's likely to become king and that Saul's trying to kill him. Because we see Abigail even talk about, when you become king, don't chase around and don't offend people. And so we know that he must still be fleeing. And we must also know that in Israel now, this is common knowledge, what we see going on here. And so we get to the point where it's harvest season. He's been protecting Nabal's livestock this whole time. He hasn't mistreated any of Nabal's men. And so he sends 10 young men, which I think actually it being 10 young men might actually matter to this because you'll see why. He says 10 young men to send a message to him saying, "Greetings, since it's a festive time, since we didn't mistreat you, since we protected your livestock, can we have some of it?" And Nabal's answer is one of disdain, one of mockery, and also seems to imply that, why are you, going against your king? And so it really hits kind of David in all of the sore spots. It just really, in a very rash way, sends away David's people with absolutely nothing. And what we see here is it gets back to David, and David's reaction is to be completely and utter rash and say, "Strap on, we're going to go kill this guy and all his men." So that's the insult that Nabal has. David's answer is, "Let's go kill him." And so we're going to pause there as we talk about this story. This almost feels like two teenage kids who don't have control of their own maturity and their own wisdom, and the first one makes a rash move, and the next one comes back just as rash, if not more rash than the first one. And so what we almost see here is two adult men behaving like children. And if that doesn't sound like a story that happens all the time, even today, I don't know what does. Because I can tell you, we all still at times become very rash. When we become rash, we become like children. And so that's what we're going to really focus today is this rashness. What was going on here? What does that rashness do? That emotion, being rash. What is it? How does it get in us? How do we handle it? Because what we see here is these guys did not handle it well. And so, rashness can kind of have its root from a lot of different things. It can be a short-sightedness. It can just be a misunderstanding. But a lot of times it's rooted in some form of emotion. And so let's talk about Nabal. Why was he rash? We don't really know, but I'm gonna throw some theories out there. First off, he might have just been greedy. We see that he's very rich. Um, we see, and we see that he has a lot of livestock. Just to be clear, we also don't know how he got his wealth. We don't know if this was transferred year over year from his parents. We don't know if he's kind of a self-made man. We don't know why, but we know that he's very, very rich. And To me, it sounds like one of two things is happening here, and they're kind of related, which we're going to talk about. First off, I think he's being greedy. One, I don't think he wants to get rid of any of his goods, even though he would likely have less if David and his men were protecting it. And so I think first there is just an innate greed is the first thing that may come to mind here. The second thing that might be happening here is something that happens even in modern time is he's equating his wealth with what his perceived power should be, and also likely taking that concept of wealth and applying it to what David's power should be. And so that's something that is one of those things that we're really bad at as adults, as human beings, is we equate even today modern wealth accumulation. Now we still, in a lot of cases, tie that to wisdom, to power, to intelligence, and while a person who is wealthy may be wise, may be smart, and those are wise and smart are two different things. Intelligence and wisdom is two different things, and powerful. We sort of equate them all the same, but that's not necessarily true. A person can be innately good at the skill of attaining money. The things that they are good at make it easy for them to accumulate wealth. That doesn't make them necessarily intelligent. Or maybe to put it in a better way, it doesn't make them more intelligent than the next person. It just makes it that the skills that they were blessed with are things that are pretty easily to accumulate wealth on. But again, it doesn't equate to wisdom. It doesn't equate necessarily to intelligence, or at least to an overall intelligence. And it doesn't actually equate to power. There's a lot of people that are very rich that don't necessarily have a lot of authority, other than what's under their control and their wealth. All of those things could be true of wealthy people, but it doesn't have to be true of wealthy people. And so I think what we see here is we see someone like Nabal, who, whether because of lack of confidence or just not really understanding himself very well or self-reflecting, we see him look at probably David, who likely at this time, because he's fleeing and he's in the wilderness, he likely actually pretty doggone poor. And he's saying, I'm rich, I have all this land, I have all these estates, I have all this livestock, I'm more powerful than David. What's my responsibility to provide for David? And he's taking his wealth and using it as power, or perceiving it as power over David, to the point where he can tell David, "Yeah, no, I'm not going to give you anything." I think that's probably what's happened. That it's probably a bit of a selfishness thing. It's also a perceived that he's better than David because of that wealth, and because of that he doesn't have to give him anything. So I think that's what's happening with Nabal, and we see that they kind of imply that he's not a good guy to start with, and so he's likely someone who's taken his wealth and using it in a way that he thinks he's king, because he actually talked about later on how he kind of looked over himself as king later on. So now we've talked about Nabal and why he probably gave this rash response. We then see David, and we see his rash response, and we don't really, why did he react that way? Um, this is surprising. Like I said, I think it's a flaw in David. It's one of those times where we get to see the hero show a flaw, and I think a lot of it had to do with probably first off he was hungry. If he is fleeing again, and if he is in the wilderness, there probably isn't an abundance of food or water or anything else for them to live off of. So they're probably at this time a little bit desperate, and they were frankly probably um, written, planning on the good graces of Nabal to provide for them for a period of time once the harvest came in. And so they're likely at this point kind of in a bit of a dire strait. So they are probably a bit emotional because they're hungry. Hungry people are pretty doggone angry a lot of times, for understandable reasons. It's that's hard. That's a really really hard emotion. I mean, there's not a lot of times where I've been hungry and can't eat, but I would imagine that your mood when you're in that condition is not great. And so that's the first thing. The second one is probably just the understanding of, I did all this for you, and now you're going to snub your nose up at me. What in the world? Why would you do that? That's probably David's attitude as well. There's probably a third thing that happened here, and this is why I mentioned that they sent 10 young men. Um, these 10 young men heard the message, and sort of like an old game of telephone, um, the message got warped on the way back. And so they probably went to Nabal, they passed on the message. They may have even gave the message to Nabal in a way that was a little more demanding than what David had said to them. But whatever it is these young men probably took a mean message and made it even worse. It was probably like they probably went to Nabal and said, "Hey, um, you know, we've been doing all this. Can you help us out?" Or they may have even demanded it, being rash themselves. And Nabal probably went, "No, I'm not going to do this. Why would you do this?" And then whenever it got back uh, to David, the message got a whole lot worse, being like, forget you, I hate you, don't ever come see me again. Like it probably got so uh, so manipulated from when the message got from Nabal to David between those 10 young men, because their emotions got in the way, that it might have came across as a message that was even worse to David. Regardless of what the reason is, we see David, instead of taking the high road, and remember, he took the high road one chapter back with Saul, who was trying to kill him. Instead of taking the high road here, he decides, I am going to kill this guy, and I'm going to kill all of his men as well. And so they strap on their swords, and they are on their way to go kill this guy. I cannot think of a more overreaction that David could have had, but that's a pretty doggone good one. And so we see this rashness between the two. We see two people whose emotions have just overwhelmed them. And that's the one thing about being rash, and that's the one thing about emotion stepping into this. It's contagious. The rashness of one begets the rashness of another. If the other person can't see it and the other person can't stop it, it will grab the other person. It is contagious. That rashness like this is contagious. And so in the end, what we see here is finally there's one cooler head, and that is Abigail. Abigail hears what Nabal has said, and what I feel like she probably did is she shook her head and said, "Not again." And she looked at the servants and said, "Get a bunch of stuff, load it up. We're going to go talk to David so that this does not happen." And so she is the cooler head and prevails and goes in and says, "Please don't kill us," and actually sort of plays on, you're going to be king, and please don't be a king who avenges their enemies irrationally. Be have the correct sense of justice. Is sort of what she sort of implies to him by saying, unlike Saul, you won't avenge your enemies with sort of this type of maliciousness that Saul had done. And something within there, whether it's because she brought there and asked for apology, or sort of, talked through to David, or got through to David saying, don't be like Saul the way you're avenging yourself on Nabal. But whatever it is, David calms down. He sees the wisdom of her words, and stops this pursuit. And then what we see at the very end is we see that when she comes back, Nabal is treating himself like a king. He's still being rash. He's being rash with his resources, and now he's partying. And actually, once he hears what Abigail done, dies. And what we see is Abigail becomes David's wife. And so as we end this story, I think what we need to remember is we need to act a lot more like Abigail. We need to hear what's been happened, and then be proper in our due course. We need to identify the rashness when it's creeping up to it. It is an emotion, and it's one that will overwhelm you if you allow it. It's based in greed and jealousy and fear and pride. Like all of those things will create rash decisions that the moment that we're done, we regret. We even see here in this story at the very end, we even see David realize how rash he was in saying, let's go kill him. And he even expresses regret that, man, I would have really messed things up if I would have done this. In fact, I kind of wonder if he would have continued with this rash line of let's go kill him, and if he would have actually killed Nabal and other people, I question whether he would have been king, because he would have shown himself as being a tyrant. It would have been near impossible to get the people of Israel to stand behind him when this one sort of slight against his pride caused him to kill not just one man, but an entire household of servants and family members. And so we see here where he's like, thank you, God, for letting me be calmed by Abigail and not thinking through this not becoming rash in killing this, because I don't think he would have become king if he would have followed through with his intentions here. And so in our lives, I think that's what we need to remember is when we get charged up, we make rash decisions. It's just our nature. It's important for us to identify when we're about to do that. We really, as we're getting ready to make a decision, especially if it's charged with emotion, we need to almost try and look at what our decision is going to look like from a third person, or better yet, what's that decision going to look like from God's perspective, from Jesus's perspective, as if He's watching us, because He is. What's He going to think? Is our reaction righteous? Are we giving evil? Are we giving evil for evil? Um, or are we taking a higher road and providing good from evil? Uh, you know, God doesn't say that it's okay to sin if someone sins against you. We're not really allowed to do that. We're not given that. Jesus said, if someone strikes you on the cheek, turn the other cheek. Um, we are not to take evil for evil. And when someone acts rashly against us, it's so easy to get so charged to give evil for evil and regret it immediately. So we need to stop and we need to look at this. We need to be able to see this from another person's perspective. We need to see this from God's perspective as best we can, and see if He's going to be pleased with what our reaction back is. Let's pray. Father, thank you for this week. Thank you for the nice day that we've had today, for a Sunday that we got to worship you and serve you, and thank you for every day that we get to worship and serve you. Um, as we go about our day-to-day business, as we go about our day-to-day lives, it's really easy. We always face people who are going to act rashly against us, who are going to be and there's always going to be things that happen in our lives that emotionally charge us up. When those things happen, help us not to be so quick with the decision that it's a rash decision that causes us to sin and causes us to hurt someone else, causes us to hurt you, because in the end, sin is sin. But let us always remember to pause and try and look at this from the perspective of what you would think of our decision. Would you be proud of what we decided to do? Would you be ashamed of what we decided to do? Help us to always stop and get a little perspective for what we're about to do before we do it. We ask for all these things in Jesus' name. Amen. Well, thank you guys again. By way of announcements, just a reminder, we will be back here next week at 6 p.m. And we have church on Sunday, 10:45. You can go there live. We are still doing our best to social distance and follow all the proper protocols. But if you still feel uncomfortable, you can always watch it live on the Winfield Nazarene page. You can also watch it live on the Rekindle page, the YouTube channel, and also the Virtual Ministry. So, there's no reason you can't find us on there live somewhere. But have a great evening, have a great week, and